Good evening, everybody. Thank you for logging on tonight. We have communication strategies for business owners presented by Professor Melissa Adeyeye. This meeting will be recorded and posted on our YouTube as well as live streamed to our Facebook. Tonight, you will be able to unmute your microphones to ask any questions or interact. You will also be able to use the chat feature and the Q&A feature. Without further ado, Melissa, when you're ready.
Good evening, folks. I want to make sure that you can see and hear me. If Jennifer, you would just confirm for me.
I can see you and hear you.
Perfect. As Jennifer so wonderfully did, thanks to Jennifer and to Jay for getting us started this evening. As she said, my name is Professor Melissa J. Adeyeye, and I want to thank you for taking your time to be with us tonight. What I want to bring to you is something that you already do, right? When we look at or think about the word communication, it's something that we've been doing all of our lives. But what does this mean for us as entrepreneurs or business owners? So tonight, I want to give you an overview of the learning outcomes that we will cover. First, we're going to look at how your messages are interpreted and received. We're going to go back to the basics because to understand how we do something or how we can do something more effectively, we need to look at its fundamental foundation and how we will put that back together. Next, we'll look at how to navigate cultural differences in our communication to, of course, avoid misunderstandings. And then lastly, we'll look at how to recognize and use our own body language and facial expressions to make sure that we enhance our face-to-face interactions. So to tell you a little bit about myself, if you were here last week or you were in our in-person sessions, I am a full-time professor or faculty at Suffolk County Community College, and I teach communication at our Grant campus. I have a master's of speech in communication, speech communication, rhetoric, and performance studies. Yes, it's a mouthful, so I have to keep practicing it. I've been practicing it for 15 years. And some of the things, in addition to our basic courses and our advanced courses, I am so proud to advise our students within our communications club to keep refining the skill, and also our honors communication club to make sure that we acknowledge our students doing well. I have listed here the 4 courses that I teach at the institution. My most interesting one for tonight is that interpersonal and the intercultural, and we'll be bringing in concepts from these 2 courses. One of the things that I've also done is train teachers in Asia, from South Korea, China, and Vietnam. And this is an interesting experience that I want to share with you when we talk about the cultural aspect of communication. So let's get into the basics. How are your messages interpreted and received? In communication discipline, we look at 3 models of communication. We have the action, the interaction, and the transactional model. As we talk about these different models, think with me about how you already communicate. You can look at this within your personal context, and most definitely we'll look at this in our professional and entrepreneurial contexts as well. So the first model is the action model. I do have to say that all the images that I'm using have been borrowed from the common space in Microsoft Office, so I do have permission to use them. In this action model, you have 2 figures or 2 people, if you will. This would be our interpersonal communication between 2 people. And on one side, we have the sender who would put together a message or encode it, if you will. If you can think back to the times when we had maybe the Da Vinci Code or any of your mystery novels, that there is a secret language, if you will, which there was a message hidden underneath. That's the same concept. We put together a message using that code so that the other person or the receiver can then decode it. They must have the code. So this is nothing more fancy than our language. The code I'm using right now is English. If I started to speak in Spanish, would you understand me? Well, if you have the code of Spanish, then yes, you'd be able to decode the language of that message. So When we're sending now a message, it's also sent through a channel. Now, a channel is multi-layered, and this is where we have to understand it fundamentally, and then how it's going to affect how people receive and get that message. So right now, I'm sending you a message, and I'm using a channel of not only my words, but then you can see my body, some of my actions, you can hear me. You're also doing it through Zoom. This would be different if we were face-to-face in each other's company within the same room. There is a dynamic of technology. So we are looking at a basic sender encoding a message, sending it along to the receiver, and that person decodes it and hopefully understands it. Now, what's that thunderbolt in the middle? Noise. Noise is always present in every communication context. Now, we may be thinking about noise as that sound, right? That can disrupt the message. But noise is anything that disrupts the message. For example, right now, I don't know if you can see my glasses, but the reflection of my laptop on my glasses could be a distraction to someone because it's not quite what you want to see. That's noise. So anything that you can see, things that we can hear, things that we could smell, something really bad or something really good, maybe someone's cooking in the next room, that can disrupt the intended message. It can be a distractor. So anything in the physical realm, you could be touching something, you could be tasting something. Noise is always present. Let's keep that in mind. We can't always control the noise that is present, but it exists. Let's look at our next model of communication, the interaction model. The interaction model says that we have a sender, we continue to have a sender, we continue to have a receiver. However, we are getting feedback about that message. So if we go back to action for a moment, it's just one person sending a message forward. Now, just to give you a helpful hint, I did say in the chat, and Jennifer also said it, that we do like to be participative in this session. So the way for you to do that right now could be through the chat. I sent a message. If you have that open, I encourage you to open it. If you've seen it, well, I should ask the question, did you see it? Let's step back for a moment. I encoded a message in the chat. I put it in the language of English. I typed it using that channel, and I sent it to everyone in the session. Now, did you get it?
No.
Thank you for answering. The answer that I got brings us into the interaction model. But from some of you, I didn't get a response, and that keeps us in the action model. So let's pause for a moment. Have you ever had a communication where you sent a message, but you're not sure if the receiver got it? Yeah. Think about your text messaging, right? Have you ever sent a text message and then you started to whirl out of control because we don't know if they got it or not, and you need to get something done or you need a response? The action model seeks to explain that. Let's go to the interaction model, and then I'm going to get some responses from you. The interaction gave me the response that I heard. I'm sorry I didn't ask names yet, but I'll get that name. Thank you for the response. Feedback is about the message. Feedback does not add more information. It just says, yes, no, maybe. We sort of interpret this as a one-sided conversation where the sender is the only person giving ideas and the receiver just gives feedback. Whether it's 1 or 2 word answers or sentences, it is not a new idea. Now, we've added in a couple more aspects to this model. There is a psychological context and a physical context. The psychological context says, what is happening in the minds of the sender and the receiver? So in a moment, we're going to look at what goes through your mind, but we are wise enough to know not the same thing that's going on in the other person's mind. So whenever we create a message and send it along, the other person is decoding it within the psychological context of their experience. So did they have a really long day and their brain is overwhelmed with information? Do you think that affects how they receive your message? Absolutely. If it's at the beginning of the day when they are fresh and they are ready to receive, do you think that affects the way they think about your message? Absolutely. Let's also add in physical context, which I sort of just mentioned. The physical context is your environment around you. So that is the room that you're sitting in, or maybe you're outside. That could be the time of day, whether this was 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. Context can be so many physical elements around you, whether it is hot or cold. Again, let's go back and think about our senses. And so, how does that context affect the way you're, one, sending the message, and two, the other person receiving the message? All right, I want to pause here before I go to our third one. So if you have some thoughts or feedback, you can either do two things. You can use the raised hand function so that I can make sure to call you, so that I can hear from everyone. Or if you don't feel comfortable unmuting, you're more than welcome to write in the chat. And if you would give me your permission to share what you said so that other people can be in the conversation as well. So I got a few responses when I said, hey, I sent you a message. Did you get it? I have one message that says, I didn't get it. And I have another message that says, got it. All right, folks, I'm opening it up to conversation. Why could it be that one of our participants got the message and the other one did not? Okay, go ahead, Mary. Or tell me
Well,
how you'd like me to refer to you.
oh yeah, Mary is fine. Thank you.
Great.
It said in my message box, it said only that this message can only be seen by the other panelists. So I'm a participant, not a panelist, right?
Ah,
That
that,
was what my message said.
that is correct. So your status in this Zoom session affects whether or not you can get the message or how you can respond. So if you go down and click the to box, I'm sorry, I can't show you my chat, but folks, if you're following along on Zoom, click the to box in the chat, click the blue box and go to everyone. And that should open it up. I'm not sure if you have the capability, check. All right, I'm going to go into the chat because I got another response. So Betty says, the other person might not have gotten it because you might have only sent it to the person. Very true. So in sending the message, I might have done it directly. Now, the context, the physical context, if I could circle that on our PowerPoint, the physical context is that one person asked the question. But in addition, I changed to everyone and answered the question. Something else could be going on. And Jennifer, I love that Jennifer participates too, because she has such great insight. Jennifer says, if a message was sent before you joined, then you will not see the message that was sent to everyone. So here we have three different reasons why a person may not have been able to get that message. Now, if we go back to our action model, if we go back to our action model, yeah, that's okay, that's okay. Mary says that was probably her. A few of us joined in a little bit after I sent that. But here's the thing. How would we know that the person didn't get the message? The action model does not allow for that. But when we received a response, a feedback in the interaction model, now we know. Okay, let's pause and bring this to your life. Have you used your cell phone to send a message? Sorry, you can't quite see it. And the other person did not have any feedback messages. Android people, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I don't know what to do with an Android. I welcome any responses. But I know that on the iPhone, it has feedback. You can see read, delivered. You can even see when they're typing if it's another iPhone. What goes through your mind when you sent a message, but you haven't got a response? I want to open this up, share with us in the chat, or unmute with us. Go ahead, Mary.
Guess I'm volunteering. I think my answer depends on the source or person or people contacting me. Is that fair to say? I might not wish to respond to a delivered message. I don't keep read receipts on my phone because I don't like when somebody knows I've read it. I'd like the leeway to have time to respond. That's me.
Mhm.
Or not, or never.
Mhm. Mhm.
But so that did I answer your question?
Yes, yes, Mary, exactly. And this is what we are considering in this fundamental approach.
Depends on to whom I sent the message.
Absolutely. It depends on everything, and that everything is context. We'll have context, culture, and relationship. These three things are what depend on how you create and interpret your communication. So let's keep adding now to this level, and we're going to go back through these three different models to talk about where we get some misunderstandings, and then probably how we might make different choices. So the last model and the richest model is the transactional model, or the transaction model. If you can see in the middle here, we don't just have a back and forth, right? We don't have one message being sent and then feedback. We have the ability for both persons to be communicators, not just a sender and a receiver. And in the context of society, which are your relationships, and cultural contexts, your relationship with that person, the physical and psychological context that's happening for each person, we are constantly creating meaning, sending messages. And that back and forth, that transaction is what allows us to come to the meaning that each person desires. Now, the biggest myth of communication is that the more you do it, is the better that your communication will become. That's a myth. It is effective communication that can help improve your experience. Sometimes you need to stop communicating. You need to separate, think about your communication or that situation, and then come back with different communication or different messages that each other can receive and hear and understand. So I want to share an example that we went over. We had this session in person last week, and it was a wonderful experience. And I encourage you, if you have the time, to come to us on Saturday mornings where we can explore this in person. Your face-to-face communication takes out so much more with your body expressions, your facial expressions, the sounds that you make, and just even the quick glances that can be picked up by other communicators. That's what makes it rich. Right now, in this moment, I don't know your social context. We definitely know that we're strangers to one another. We have just met in this session, but I can't see your face to know if you're interested or disinterested, questioning or understanding. I don't know your physical context, and I certainly can't know your psychological context. What I can guess is your cultural context. And your cultural context is that you came here as a business owner to understand more about how you communicate. And so for me in this moment, I'm starting to understand small parts of your context to be able to connect with you. But this is also why I always encourage participation. What goes through your mind? How do you understand it? Because that's how we can come to effective communication. So the example that I heard from one of our participants, and she gave me permission to share, I won't use names, but they mentioned that they texted a friend. They were going through their social media late at night, about 2 a.m., and found really great posts and sent their friend emails. They also sent the friend some texts at 2 a.m. The friend stopped texting. The friend never responded, and in fact, blocked our participant. Now, the question is, what do you think happened? All right, so I'm going to go back into the chat and unmute and talk to me if you'd like to. I'd like to hear what you think about this scenario. What do you think happened? Go
Are you
ahead.
waiting for
Anthony.
hands?
The raised hand function helps me to make sure I can see everybody, but I'm also trying to non-verbally, oops, excuse me a second, my lights go off. I'm also trying to non-verbally see when people want to participate. So I think, is it Anthony? And then Mary, if you want to jump in there again, perfect.
Yes, maybe the friend was, and it's Anthony. I don't know why it's spelled like that.
Okay, Anthony, sorry.
No, it's spelled kind of crazy. But yeah, maybe the friend was upset that they were texting them at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Okay. Nice. Nice job, Anthony. Mary, what do you think?
Well, I experienced this in the past 24 hours.
Ooh.
A friend texted me at like 1 something. I was sleeping, and it was all negative. It was so down and such a burden on me. I did not, thank God I didn't read it in the middle of the night, but I don't want to wake up to it because this is somebody else's long-winded, self-inflicted harm and problems. And then when I'm having my coffee in the morning, that same person is now following with a phone call. So I didn't block, but I made myself 100% unavailable to this person, the closest thing to blocking, because I felt that that was an invasion of my thought space. You know, I'm a friend. I can be a shoulder to cry on, but I thought it was an exaggerated attempt of self-pity. And so I didn't do anything to harm or hurt. I just let it be.
Thank you for sharing that, Mary. So you've added in this level of not just relational, but psychological context with the actual message, right? How is that message? What is the intent of the message? Is it positive or negative? And how does that have an effect on the person who's receiving it?
Yeah.
Betty, I see you unmuted.
I would have first of all, I think people need to know their boundaries unless it is and I'm old school. Okay. Unless it is an emergency, number one, don't call me or text me after 9 o'clock. Because when I was growing up, those were business hours. You didn't call anybody in the morning before 9 o'clock. And after 9 o'clock, out of courtesy, so they can get themselves together for the rest of the evening and for the next morning, unless it is a dire emergency, don't call me, don't text me or anything else. So I give kudos to the person who accepted the text, because you can't do that. You're not going to disrupt my peace.
So thank you for sharing that, Betty, because Betty just shared with us a cultural context, a cultural context that defines how we use our physical context in communication. So after 9 p.m., communication ceases. It stops. But for some of us, have you texted after 9 p.m.? Maybe it is acceptable for you, maybe it is not. And so this is where we're moving into what happens in the model of communication really comes to life when we're not understanding the same contexts. I'm going to keep coming back to this example because I think it's so wonderful, but it helps us to understand how is it going to be received. Now, I'm going to take what we've heard from all of our participants so far and move into how would it be received if that message at 2 a.m. was sent through one of these different social medias. Remember, I said it was through email and through text. Now, I don't know what social media you have, but you can share with us. I guess I'll tell you the ones that I have. I think LinkedIn is not on here, but we can also talk about that because that is one of the professional platforms. But we have Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, WhatsApp, or messenger services. There are more, right? So let's now take the same scenario of our participant sending messages, sending forwards, whatever you will, videos through social media. Would it change the friend's interpretation? Yes or no, and why? And let's be specific with the social media. All right. Any thoughts? Go ahead, Mary.
I think it's cultural and also cultural appropriateness. I work in different time zones. I live in New York, Eastern Standard Time Zone. So I try to adapt to my natural, normal living time zone. But I was just doing work with Italy and then an Italian person who's in Milwaukee and I'm in New York. So culturally appropriate timing is I struggle, but I try to make it a not bizarre hour. Maybe somebody could imagine that it's not after I've had drinks or it's not, the first thing before I've even had coffee, but I try to make the impression as though it's an average hour of some day in some time zone. But I have to I have to be careful.
Absolutely. So that gave us a very specific, cultural norm of just looking at time zones, right? What are waking hours versus what are sleeping hours, right? So Italy, I'm not sure, but I'm sure they're at least maybe 6 or so hours ahead. Don't quote me on that. I'd have to look it up.
Yes.
But you could definitely be in your waking hours and they would be in sleeping hours. When you want to get some work done, but they, should be sleeping. So in that context, would the other person view the communication as invasive? Maybe not, because the context would be, oh, but they are in another time zone. I just got a message from Claudia, and I'd like to share that out, Claudia. She says, I'm fine with that. I have my social media notifications, so she'll see it when she sees it. Now, in the context of social media, for some of us, those notifications might be silenced, or when you go into the application is when you see the notification. And so if they're doing it at 2 a.m. and this is your same time zone, doesn't matter when they did it. When you open the application is when you're ready to receive it. But what if you get these push notifications and it's coming in at 2 a.m.? Does the medium affect the interpretation? Let's go to Facebook for a moment. How would you interact with your clients? Would you use any one of these platforms? Betty, I see you unmuted.
I'm on Facebook I'm going to go on LinkedIn, and I don't really, I haven't tried the X or the purple one or the green one or whatever.
That's fine.
Um,
That's fine.
If I was working with a customer on Facebook, I would, as much as possible, keep it professional and businesslike.
Mm-hmm. 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 So Facebook has expanded from a social platform of just between close relationships to a great way to expand your business and get
Mhm.
into networks through people's social network, right? So it depends on who you're interacting with and if it's purely for business. Facebook can be one post, like our action model that we put on our page, and whoever comes to our page or has notifications on maybe reading that message. So we don't have an opportunity to correct any interpretation. We don't have an opportunity to add more context. We only have what's there. So thanks for sharing with us, Betty. Facebook, because of the way we communicate on Facebook, we want to make sure that we stay at a professional level because we don't
Right.
always have an opportunity to correct any misunderstandings. All right, Anthony, go ahead.
Yes, as far as business, we have on Facebook, I have a business page, and people can use Messenger, so they can messenger us. If it's after hours, uh, then we have an automatic reply. That
Mhm.
they can give us a call. After 9 a.m. or whatever it may be.
Perfect. And thank you for sharing that, Anthony. So, already having a professional page gives the context to whomever is responding to your ads or just the presence of your business. Having that automated response is still like that transactional communication. You're telling them, hey, we got your message and thank you. We will follow up during X business hours or normal business hours. This is kind of now bringing us back to the first scenario, because I'm going to start to use some words like who was right and who was wrong. And you should be very weary when we start to use the words right and wrong. Mary, I see a hand up. Was that from before?
Probably.
Okay,
Yeah. There was something else that I was going to say about social media communications,
sure. Go
which
ahead.
is that often enough it'll tell you it tag, timestamp,
Mhm.
etc. But there are so many of these mediums, if we're talking, that we can adjust them. You can adjust the time and date of a
Mhm.
post. You can adjust
Mhm.
the time and date. There's so
Mhm.
many tricks of sending the messaging and then interpreting the messaging. And most of the mediums I'm seeing on the screen have created ways to manipulate the methods or the details of the communication. So you almost don't
Absolutely.
even know if it's today or 2 weeks ago, or if only you can see it, or if other people, and the idea that everything can be screenshot and sent or forwarded or BCC'd. It's like there's no trust model that remains to my knowledge.
So, Mary, you bring up a great point of having the ability to, the only word I can come up with, I'm going to say adjust. The ability to adjust your communication with specific parameters. Now, it's not necessarily right and it's not necessarily wrong. It's what is the effect that it has on our communication. So just as a quick point, I want to point to the difference between I'm just going to point to the difference between these 6 social medias. Um, Actually 5, because one of them is Messenger. So Anthony mentioned that on Facebook, you can send out an action model type message, right? You just send out your message and whoever sees it, sees it. Do you know if they saw it or not? Not really. You only know until you get feedback. And that could be through the messenger when someone says, hey, I'm interested in your product or services. Now, Instagram is connected to Facebook. And so the medium of which we send that message is not usually text-based, right? So we change the channel, if you will. So rather than having maybe more writing in Facebook, in Instagram, you'll see that the culture is use more images. This affects the communication and this affects how people receive your message. On X, formerly known as Twitter, the culture of the social media is to have short, succinct messages. Well, we know that people get around that by screenshotting a longer message and posting it, but it's still a very short and brief message. Well, why does that matter? Because it takes away lots of context. When we're brief in our message, we leave a lot to be understood by the receiver. And so you may notice in the news, or if you are somebody who looks at Twitter, you have people responding very emphatically to short messages because they get whatever interpretation that their physical and psychological context allows for them in that moment. So social media, especially in Twitter, can become very, what's the word? Explosive, if you will. So we have to be very cautious of the types of business messages that we put out on Twitter. Excuse me, X. If we're looking at YouTube, that's another medium sort of similar to what I'm doing with you. If we did not have this live Zoom component, I would just be recording a message and you take it or leave it. You could leave some comments at the bottom and maybe people get back to you, but it's a much slower communication. So if we're understanding how communication works and we understand these platforms, we have to be able to construct our business messages appropriately. And this is culture, okay? So I want to move into what would be different for our example. A 2 a.m. message, as Anthony and Mary said, if it's email, there is a function to say, wait, send later. That could have been sent at 8:30 or 9 a.m. during business hours, as was mentioned by Betty, right? Within the business hour realm. So you might be up at 2 a.m. doing whatever you need to, but it can be sent later. We also have on social media, again, your ability to resend at different times. Now, the context is what we've been talking a lot about. Where are we sending our message? What's our physical and psychological context? Culture is also what we've been talking about, and we'll look at that a little bit deeper. But your relationship with that person definitely determines how you construct that message. Are you familiar with them? Are they new to you? We have so many rules in communication that when we don't have a close relationship, it's important to err on the side of formality. So let's bring this back into the business realm. When we are communicating, we are looking at our stakeholders. We define stakeholders as simply the people who have a stake in your business or have an interest in your business. So these, for sure, are our potential clients or customers, or it could be investors, or you're looking for investors, people who want to put money or other types of value into your business. These could be your employees, the people working for you. We could have the suppliers, people giving, not giving, but you're working with them to get product or parts of your product or things that you need to provide services. And then next, our communities. This is a little bit different. And I think of it as a tricky kind of stakeholder because your communities are the people that you might get these other 4 areas out of, right? You might get clients out of your community. You might get investors or employees or suppliers out of your community, but we work within spaces. Our space could be our local geographic area. Our space could be an online or virtual space, a group of people that come together at certain times or in a certain platform. It could be a global space. So communities can be a little bit harder to define. And why that gives me pause is because when it's harder to define the group of people, it's harder to define what's appropriate in our communication. Lastly, all of us as business owners have to deal with the government, right? The saying always comes to mind, two things are sure in life, taxes and death. So we've got to pay the government, or they have their hand in what we're doing. But one thing about the government is that they're not our friends. And so what do I mean by that when we're interacting with government entities? I'm going to go back for a little bit to our transactional model. Sometimes when we're doing paperwork, we just send the message on paper. Did they receive it? Folks, if you've ever dealt with the government, and I'd love to see your heads shaking, do you always know if they got it? No.
Okay.
So we have to move into different models to be able to follow up, read receipts. Do we need to go in face to face? Do we need to show up at whatever government space that we need to get our business done? Perhaps. When we're interacting with the people in these government entities, what is their social, what is their cultural, what's the relational, physical and psychological context as we're interacting with them? And so my suggestion in these contexts, when we do not have a close relationship, is always err on the side of formality and kindness. So let me give you some helpful hints as we've talked about theory. As we talk about theory, these helpful hints, I want to play a quick little activity with you. If you're in the chat, please, I would love to hear what you see. If you are comfortable unmuting, use that raise hand function so I can get to each of you timely. All right, here we go. What do you see? All right. If you're in the chat, pop it in there quickly. And then if you're comfortable unmuting, would you tell us what you see?
Hi.
Hi.
I see
Oh.
someone playing an instrument, and at the same time, I see a face
Yeah.
of a woman's face.
Yep.
Ah, Betty, you see both?
Yep.
Yes, I see both.
Okay.
Now I do.
Okay, Mary, what did you see first?
At first, I thought it was a man playing a saxophone with a bird flying towards him.
Right.
Ah, okay, okay. So in the chat, I have a woman and a jazz player. I have a woman's face. I have a woman, and I have a woman and a sax player.
Right.
So did you see this first? Maybe some of us only saw the saxophonist, right? Maybe some of us only saw the woman. Quite a few of you were able to see both, right? Taking the time to see both. I use this activity in all of my classes to demonstrate the power of perception. We all perceive the world from our point of view. Now, I wonder, have you seen this image before? Or maybe have you seen these kind of psychology images? Because they're common, right? Where you can see multiple things the longer you look at it. That has to do with perception. So when we're entering into communication, the question is, what's the right answer? What do you think?
Do your best and hope and pray.
Is this 66 or 99? As a competent communicator, it is important that we, one, recognize that yes, it is, and I'm going to pick the one on the right, it's 99 for me. But I can also acknowledge that it looks like 66 to you. That doesn't make my answer wrong. It makes me able to see two or multiple perspectives. And so as we're talking about competent communication for business owners, we're thinking about being able to see someone else's perspective and meet them there because we're looking for understanding. All right, we got a comment here. If it's debt, 66. If it's income, 99. I like that one. That's a great way to look at it. There's no wrong answer here.
In context.
In context, always in context. So I want to share this. Quote, and this is about you, folks. The entrepreneur is seen not only as a person who is capable of taking risks and starting a business, but also as an individual who uses their skills and characteristics in order to create value in a company. So folks, this means that it's you who creates the value. So as you enter into communication with your stakeholders, it's never about your product or your service. It's about you.
Oh,
It's
wow.
always been about you. So your communication is key in this way. How are you connecting with your stakeholders? All right, we've done a lot of theory, so let's get into practical. So these are things that I encourage you to write down, to take notes, because we do only have about half hour left and I want to get into the practical aspects for you. So in writing, when we talk about that action model, writing an email, err on the side of formality. We have a greeting, and then we begin our writing or the body of our text. So our first bullet here is adopt an adult to adult approach. What does this mean? Are you talking to children? No. We don't mean that we're talking down to someone. But often when we are experts in our area, it is easy for us to exist in our expertise and then forget that other people have their own intellect and expertise. Just because they don't know our field doesn't mean they're an idiot.
Right.
Okay? So we're talking to everyone with a level of respect. That's just the bare minimum, right? So an adult to an adult approach. Secondly, be courteous. There is a saying, you get more flies with honey than with vinegar. I want to go back to our government stakeholders for a moment. Some of you might currently be government employees or might have come from government. Technically, I work for the government, so I have some positive aspects there. But you may see, if you watch long enough, that when you come into a government entity, they treat the workers without respect and courtesy. And so that person's context can be an entire day of negativity. So when you need to get your paperwork done, what is the context that you're walking into? Now, you cannot control that person or their context, but you can control what you bring to that moment. A small bit of courtesy can set up your communication for an effective moment, more information, somebody that you can network with, a connection to that entity or to that supplier that you can keep coming back to, all because you simply said, "Good morning. How are you today?" And not rush them through, actually ask them, "I hope you're well." A little bit of courtesy goes a long way. Third, focus on the positive. Now, folks, sometimes things are happening and we have some serious situations, right? Mary, if you don't mind, if I go back to your situation, I'm not going to go too in depth with it because I don't want to offend at all. But sometimes people are having a hard issue. What is the positive that we can bring from it to that person, right? Sometimes we need to extend our boundaries, but how do we do that in courtesy and focus on the positive moment? Is that assuring them a different time to be a support as you've been in the past? Is that maybe taking your time before you can come back in and say the message with calmness and kindness? Because we don't always have that. And if you'd like to talk more about emotions, please join me on Saturday for our leadership session where where we will talk about emotional intelligence, being able to guide our emotions and other people through emotional events. That is a true skill of a leader. Lastly, on our list of writing constructively is being genuine. Say what you mean and be clear on what it is that you need. So how would this look? I want to open a Word document just to illustrate. I apologize, I don't have it in the PowerPoint. Let's see if I can move it over quickly. Okay, so here we are in our Word document. As we're looking at email, an email is like writing a formal letter, and the rules still apply in the business realm. Whether that we have an address of the person, and we would list that there, then we would list the date that we are writing our communication. And then the next thing we have is a greeting. Dear whomever, sir or madam, if we know their name, we are addressing them with formality. Now, the reason why we address them with formality is because of culture. If we do not know the relationship with this person, most cultures are formal. And so having that greeting is a standard in business communication. We would have the body of our text. But the trend that we've been seeing now, especially after the start of the pandemic, and it hasn't become overused. I hope this email finds you well. Or another statement that simply is a positive note to begin what you were saying. Now, we close with a complimentary close. Sincerely still is used, but people say best regards, and we have lots of other ways that you could close that up with your name. Now, my point here is to go back to these 4 bullets. Have an adult, yes, spell check does find those things. Have an adult to adult approach, right? If you are using language within your industry, be careful of jargon. Jargon are terminologies that only you and people within your industry know. If we look back on our stakeholders, I'm going to jump back real quick. Pretty much the only people who understand your jargon would be clients, maybe clients after they've come to know your services or your products, maybe investors after they've become entrenched in your business, but employees are really the people who know the jargon of our business or of our industry. Maybe suppliers, and not as much as your employees will know. So we're thinking about context, just using words that they will know. Be careful of using that jargon. So what about texts? All right, well, Melissa, you're sending a text. You're not going to add in their address and anything like that. Okay, but simple things matter. If we don't have a close relationship, it is important to start what I have to say with hello and that person's name, right? It addresses them. It reminds them of that you are talking to them and that you know them. Maybe they don't remember you. Maybe they don't have your number saved. That could be a context, right? I want to remind you of, or before you start asking for, I want, hello, that common courtesy. Okay. Let's get into some more helpful hints of what to put in our writing. So as we're writing, we're thinking about tone. Our tone is the overall attitude that we're creating in this message. So you could read it through to yourself and it might sound okay, but I would always encourage you to pause before sending. Now, this is especially true when you may have an emotional response to whatever is coming toward you, especially if there's something that is angering you or agitating you. We create tone through our choice of words, right? So before we said, be careful of your jargon, right? And that's what we mean by diction, whatever words that you're using. If you're using technical words, you may put in a synonym so that the person understands it. Again, think of who the stakeholder is. The word order, how you are starting. As I just showed you, before asking for something, offer something. And we call that the norm of reciprocation. We often want to get something before we give it, and vice versa. The third thing we're looking at in our tone is how you're constructing your sentences. And I'll give you some helpful hints. It is an extensive list of what types of words that we're using that create positive versus negative. And lastly, our viewpoint, going back to perception. Before we send out that email, before we send out that text, remember that they cannot see you if you're smiling or frowning. So what word are you using that could be interpreted or needs facial expression to be interpreted? Could you use a more concrete word rather than abstract words? What do you think is their context? Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying sit down and overthink every communication context, or are they sitting at home? Are they up looking for my email? That's not what I mean. Put just a little bit of thought into what is their situation and how they may view the communication you're sending. We often think about this when we are trying to gain business, right? Whether we are doing marketing plans and engaging in marketing. But think about when we are operating our business, when we are networking, how does that change? And what viewpoints might those persons be coming from in that moment? The second thing we will consider is your scope. What's the impact of what you're going to say? And how do you think it's going to be received? So again, I could say it till I'm blue in the face. Pause before you send. This has become an increasingly appropriate skill that I myself use in the academic world, because there are emotions every day. I deal with at least 120 students 2 days in a 2-day span, okay? And so for me, that means I'm managing a lot of people's experiences, their contexts, and their emotions, because we're humans and we're going through things. How will they receive my message and what impact will it have on them? So what's the purpose of what I'm saying? What are the constraints that I'm working within? And try to think a little bit further to, can I be more succinct in how I'm saying this? Can I say this with courtesy? Can I be kind? How will that impact the receiver? and it might make my communication and my professional relationship go a little bit further. So the hardest thing for us to do is to keep positivity. Because life is challenging. It will, if it doesn't have challenges, please tell us what to do. But life definitely has challenges. And so we're not running away from what the challenges are, but we are being specific and intentional about being constructive and positive rather than focusing on the negative. Because no matter what the situation is, we can construct to have a better experience. So I'll go through just a few of these because I do want to get to the other part of our learning outcomes here. So the first one is very simple. You misunderstood my message. Okay, that is true. But perhaps we could reframe it to say, you understood a portion of my message, and this other part needs clarity. Okay? Excuse me one moment. All right. Disgusted versus pleased, right? I'm disgusted in your behavior. What is it that they've done that you can be pleased with? And what needs to change? What do we want to see do differently? Okay. Again, that 66 versus 99, we're not saying that you're wrong in your perspective or even how it makes you feel, but we're intentionally taking a constructive approach because perhaps that's an employee that we want to help to do better, right? So that it benefits our business. Perhaps that is a potential client looking at their own experience and maybe not seeing your service or your product in the way that you see it. How can you bring them back into seeing the value of your product? Same thing with investors. How can you help show them your perspective and have them excited for your business? Let's jump down to patronized. This was a question that came up before. What's the difference between belittled and patronized? And so we sat and we looked it up. Belittled, I like to remember this as what's in the word, little, if we go back to adult. Oftentimes, and sometimes I think the little people or the children in our society, we think are not intelligent. They are just at a different development level, all right? It doesn't make them dumb. It doesn't make them incapable. It means they operate on a certain level that they are capable. And so using the word empowered meets them where they are and gives them the positivity to be invested in you and your business, right? So if whoever our stakeholder is, we don't want to belittle them. We want to empower them. And whatever it is that is bringing or connecting them to us and to our business. And then I want to jump down to the second to last one, excluded versus creating a sense of belonging. And this is something that stuck out to me in social media lately, which is the word fitting in versus being accepted. So in our communication, are we listening to what are the needs of our stakeholders? And are we accepting them for where they are? And then providing perspective that we can connect to their experience. If you have a moment, and if you haven't already, I encourage you to screenshot this list. Use it in your writing. Use it in your language. It takes practice. It takes time. But it is a perspective that will help to draw our connections with others. The next concept that has become a very important tool when you're doing especially face-to-face is the I versus you. And this is a typical tool that is used for conflict resolution. Again, we're honoring the way that you see things. We're honoring your perspective, but it's also important as a communicator to look at the other person's perspective. And so the I versus you language becomes collaborative because it allows you to express yourself in honesty and to be genuine, while also giving feedback to the other person. So if you simply just think about I versus you, if you say you, what does your body typically want to do? You want to point, right? We say you, and it comes with that very negative face, that very judgmental face. You did this to me. You didn't do that. And it becomes accusatory. How does that feel on the other side? Right? A person will draw back or they'll get defensive, and it only adds to conflict. But when you say I am owning, right? Fingers don't go out. The body language comes in. I feel this way. I am frustrated when XYZ doesn't take place. I am frustrated, or I'm saddened by. That I language allows you that emotional expression without the attack or the destruction of attacking with the word you. So this is one that I encourage you to use in your businesses, in your personal relationships, and it's great for when you definitely have to give boundaries. I need my space. I need time in the morning to do X, then I can do Y. Try it for yourself. I versus you. The verbal feedback is what is allowing you and the other person to get to the same understanding. Remember, as I showed you these communication models, there is so much happening around you, just even when you say hello. So being able to give feedback and being armed with specific language, concrete language, allows you and the other person to share the same perspective or get close to it. You may not agree on both perspectives, on each other's perspective, but it will allow you to see where they're coming from. So use these things such as open-ended questions, clarifying questions, questions that confirm that you understood what they're trying to say to you. So now we're not just focusing on sending your messages. We're also thinking about how are we listening to our stakeholders? Are we asking for clarification so that we truly understand how our services or products can serve them? I'm going to skip over transactional because we've been talking about that. So let's get into communication and then finish up with our nonverbal. So, our cultural differences rather than nonverbal. So we said that relationship really has to do with what we would choose. And when we have a close relationship with people, we often take for granted all the etiquette that we have come to learn. And so this word of netiquette is what has been coined for technology learning. What is the etiquette when we are entering or when we are using technology, such as email, text message, Zoom, for example, right? If we know who's on the other side, we're able to connect closer. And that may be through doing what we had in the last slide, asking questions. So, I apologize, this is not clear at all. So I will give you an overall of what this says in one of the articles that I have for you in the sources. A study was done looking at how people determined what to do, right? So etiquette is what's right and wrong to do. If you think about social etiquette, when you walk into a room, what's the first thing you do? Some people know that they go and they greet the host. Other people, it's okay to kind of blend into the wall. We could also say it depends. It depends on the type of social gathering? Is it a professional gathering? Is it in the middle of the day? Is it at night? Again, looking at those different physical and social contexts. So this article interviewed people asking, how did you learn what to do? And overwhelmingly, they found that, well, I might learn as an individual. And that's because I put myself out there. I talked to people, and then I got rejection, right? Rejection is a part of the human experience. That is the hard way that we learn. We know, don't do that again. That is the same thing when we are dealing with communication. But another level, which seems to be more effective, is a group level learning. Is it okay by watching what other people do in the group? So for example, I was talking with Jennifer about the in-person sessions and having food at some of these sessions. No, we won't have food at ours, but you still should come anyway. But the discussion was, nobody touched the food. Nobody touched the food, even though they were told by the instructor to go and get the food. Well, nobody goes to get the food because the social norm or the etiquette is, you shouldn't be the first one. Because if you watch, when one person goes up to get food, then you will have more people follow. And you may be nodding along with me because you've experienced that, or maybe you were the first person to go, or maybe you're the person to follow. And so how do we determine this, right? Here was an example of how a person figured out what was it okay to do and what wasn't okay to do. So here he says, someone says, enjoy your meal. That's the culture, right? That's what you would do. You wouldn't say, hey, can you please stop eating? No, but you might say, you might give looks, right? If you're attracting attention, right? You might stop because people, might turn away from you. And these start to become those nonverbal communication cues, right? Things that aren't being said to you, things that we need to observe in our interactions. And that's where we go to face as the richest form of communication. So when you have the opportunity, go out and talk, go out and network, go to business forums where you can show your business and you can talk to other business owners. And this is a part of the way that we learn our etiquette. So as we think about culture, we usually think that culture is, ethnicity, race, geographic location. It's so much more. It is so much more than I can share with you in our session here. But knowing that it is everything about us tells us that there's so much for us to ask questions about. Okay, so from your family to where you live, to the hobbies or things that you do, to your business, culture has all of that. So what are the norms that you've experienced? I'm going to go through this list in the interest of time. As we think about, again, culture is not just when we think about where people live in the world. Culture is how we do things. So first we have this collectivistic versus individualistic view. This part of communication was developed and commissioned from the US government during World War II in the interest of espionage. That is our history, and that's part of where intercultural communication has come from. And so there was a list of classifications of nations to see how they exist and how they do things. We could classify nations using these two, collectivistic versus individualistic. And I'll give you an example. Sweden, if you look at their social programs, there are lots of benefits that are given to the society, just as being a citizen of the nation. And therefore, being a citizen has some stringent rules or guidelines, right? You have to be or do certain things to become a citizen to then enjoy. Now, the idea of that is the collective, the group or individuals work, but they work toward taking care of the group, a collective, versus individualistic. The United States is classified as an individualistic culture, where our American dream is if you work hard, you can achieve. It's not looking at a social program to support that. However, we do find that we have some collectivistic elements within our society. So this is why culture is not a very easy thing to define. If you start to think about your experience, where are you within your family? Are you collectivistic or individualistic? But then you're a business owner, which means you definitely are experiencing or operating within an individualistic world frame. So just in that example, we can be multiple things in multiple parts of our lives. This brings us back to being able to acknowledge that in our communication with that person and operate within that culture. The next that usually gets people is a low context versus a high context message. This one usually gets confusing. And so it's, And so we focus on the context. A high context message is thinking about that psychological, physical, social, relational, all those contexts. And so the message may be short and abstract in language, right? It's vague because the sender is relying on the receiver to use contextual cues to interpret, versus a low context person who may be more direct and to the point. We often see a conflict between these two cultures because a low context person says what they mean and says it directly, and a high context person may view that as being rude, being, I guess maybe too brash might be interpreted as that. And a low context person might view a high context person as maybe dismissive or evasive. So this is where our prior list comes back. Communicate in courtesy and kindness, because we may not be sure what culture they're operating in. And this is why questions are important. A high power distance versus a low power distance also speaks to that formality. The United States is typically a high power distance culture, meaning you have a CEO on top, and then you have different levels of workers, if you will, different power levels within that structure. A low power distance means that more people have shared power. Now, you are the entrepreneur. I'm not sure if you're working with other people, but I would make the assumption that most of us are doing it by ourselves. And so you're that CEO and owner. And it depends on how you start to structure your business. But the typical model is that high power distance. So as you are starting a business relationship with someone else, err on the side of formality, because more often in American context and around the world, you have that high power distance in business dealings. Now, lastly, this goes back to our first example. Oh, and we have a nice comment here. Try to make short context, but be careful in what you say. Absolutely, absolutely. You want to be clear and concise, not just to be brief, but to have concrete language so that we're not left to interpret those messages. The last is the time approach. And so this is where we go back to our first example, right? Where we said 2 a.m. is just too early. Well, for that person, they were polychronic, meaning time is abundant. There's lots of time. This is a person who would show up to a party that starts at 8, they'd show up at 10 or 11. This is a person who works all hours of the night to get their business going because they have all this time to do it. A monochronic person is a person who starts and ends, right? They start at 9, they end at 5. And at 5:01, that time is designated for something else because time is linear, time is short. Now, your approach to time is cultural. So how does that affect how you do business and how you expect business communication? So I will tell you, I have had business conversations at 10, 11 p.m. at night. Remember, I told you I did some business dealings in other places of the world. So this is not a broad stroke to say this happens everywhere, but I've had experiences where business conversations were put into a social context late at night and to 1 in the morning, and we're having a good time, but it's business. I'm not a friend with this person and they don't see me as a friend. But that interaction was necessary for that culture, for that relationship. For some of us, no, never. I wouldn't do that. And that's okay too, right? You can say, I can set up a meeting with you. We can do it via Zoom, or we can go to lunch. A lot of conversations and a lot of business happens around food. So having those going out, meeting up,
All right, now
sometimes they're
take care.
great. I'm sorry, go ahead. Oh, I think we might have unmuted. That's okay. So thinking about your cultural context, but also thinking about their cultural context allows you to see, okay, where can you meet in the middle? And instead of taking it personally, understanding how they're operating. So how can we avoid misunderstandings? This is the list that you can write down or you can screenshot. Number 1, don't assume, ask. Now, we're not asking this person to educate us on their culture because that's rude. There are several books, websites, there are people who are trained like myself to educate people about various cultures. It's not that person's responsibility to instruct you about their culture, but ask for clarification, ask for understanding before you make assumptions about their experiences. Secondly, how to avoid misunderstandings is to acknowledge that misunderstandings will happen. Just because you're an effective communicator doesn't mean you won't misunderstand. Your ability to be gracious, to be forgiving, and to ask for clarification is what will help you recover from that. Physically, we want to maintain what's called an arm's length. If I were to put my arm out in front of me, that's about 4 feet. And that has been a studied distance of where we keep formal distance before we know that person, right? As a broad scale between various cultural contexts, if we don't have a close relationship, we keep a distance until we become more familiar. Fourth, speak slow and deliberately. This is not because of different languages. This is because of different processing and different understanding of your business. Remember, you're excited about your business. You know it in and out, but it doesn't mean that the other person knows it. And it doesn't mean they can process your jargon quickly. So speak slow, speak deliberately, so they can follow along with what you are trying to bring across to them. Use your simple, concise, straightforward language. Idioms are those sayings. It's raining cats and dogs. You often lose people on that because we don't just vary culturally through language. We also vary through time, right? So the idioms of your time and your generation are different for another generation. It's different from one geographic location to another geographic location. Do you say soda, soda pop, pop? All of those are different, right? Just in the one language that we speak. So be simple and straightforward. Use formal language until we get closer together, until we deepen that relationship. With your eye contact, be brief, okay? But make that eye contact. Eye contact is not used the same way throughout the world. It is a Western cultural norm to maintain eye contact when you're talking with somebody. But in a high power distance relationship in other cultures, direct eye contact can be seen as threatening. It can be seen as dismissive. It can be seen as something negative. So although we do want to show that we are connected, make frequent but not prolonged eye contact. Next, reserve those hand gestures to show us or to demonstrate instructions, things that you want to see done or things that you are trying to illustrate with your hands. Some of us will say our culture uses a lot of hand gestures. If you can see yourself kind of flailing your hands, and I'm exaggerating, that might be something you want to practice as you reserve those hands a little bit further down. The idea here is you don't want your hand gestures to be in front of your face because that's where we're looking for the information and the meaning. And lastly, as I said at the beginning, do your research. Whatever you've learned about this person's culture and the way that they operate, maybe they're doing a business that's slightly that is interesting but different from yours. Do your research. We live in a world with so much information. Get to know a little bit about their world, and that will help you make your choices for how you communicate with them. So I am cognizant of our time. So I want to bring to us the key elements in mastering your body language. So very similar that you will see that I had from our written conversation to your face-to-face conversations. Number one, center your positivity, right? When you walk into a room, what does your posture, your facial expression say about you? Remember, you are your business, right? It's not your product. People do business with people. And so center your positivity. What is great about your service and about your project, what you provide? Look at your smile. What do you look like to other people? And I know this sounds very rudimentary, but you need to look at yourself in a mirror. How do people receive you? Maybe you think you're smiling, but you look like you've got to check that face. Craft what your genuine slow smile is, okay? And that doesn't mean we're all teethy and grinning goofy. We are looking at what is your presentation of self that you want to bring across. Third, stand up, stand straight, bring those shoulders back. When someone is talking to you and you're hunched over and you're not maintaining eye contact, that affects the way they receive your message. But if those shoulders are back, you're looking directly at them, you have that subtle smile, they may feel more eased with you. They feel your confidence, and so they will receive your message differently. Fourth, when you walk into that room, if we think about networking or in other business situations, greet the crowd. Don't be afraid to say, hello, how are you? If you didn't take our networking session, I encourage you to meet up with us in person on Saturday, where we will talk about and do our handshakes, our elevator greeting, our elevator pitch, our one-liner. Have that handshake. Be open to talking to new people, because that's how you're going to grow your business. That's how you're going to get yourself out there. And don't forget, angle yourself toward whomever you're speaking to. It was studied that in a social context of a bar, you may or may not go to one, but the persons who open their arms, have an open gesture, and they're slightly angled out outside of the bar, had more people come to speak to them, right? More people interested and happy toward them versus the person who is closed off and kind of hunched over. Our body language matters. And that is really what's received when we are face to face with someone. Are they approachable versus are they closed off? So we've covered so many things tonight, but I want to end with the concept of resilience. We've talked about how you can think about your communication, think about how others perceive your communication, and use some tips in your writing and your body language, your face-to-face communication. But you can only do that through developing resilience. Resilience, this is borrowed from Cornell University's Cornell Health website, and building yourself up because you are capable and what you're doing is hard, but you're doing it, right? Giving yourself time to practice, engage, reflect, make meaning out of what you're doing to get to your purpose. With each of these sessions, I hope that you will reach to your level of success. I want to encourage you to come to us on Saturday for 2 more sessions, building strong workplace relationships and looking at leadership skills. We will also be going over networking in person on the 27th. We would love to have you there if you're able to come in. I gave you my email, but I believe Jennifer will also send out some resources from this session. And please let us know what we can do to help you on your journey. Best of luck to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. This was excellent.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Have a nice night, everybody.
Thank you. You too.